Good morning. How are y'all doing? Good. Well, as our speaker said, I'm Dan Pedrotty. I'm Director of Pensions and Capital Strategies for the American Federation of Teachers, and we work with our trustees within AFT on responsible investment and protecting retirement security. But before I start, I wanted to thank Hank Kim for the invitation and also commend Mel Aronson, who I know is your chair. Mel is also the chair of the AFT Trustee Council, which for us is really our organizing committee and our leadership group of trustees. So thanks to both Hank and Mel. Okay. I was worried for a second that was childproof, but I figured it out. So our starting point, and I think Robert really laid this out extremely well, our starting point is that you all in the audience as trustees really are blessed with a sacred duty in my mind, in that you are stewards of workers' capital, and defined benefit plans in this country are what remains of real retirement security. And by that I mean the Federal Reserve recently did a study where they looked at the median retirement savings of someone just right smack in the middle and then someone close to retirement age. And what the Federal Reserve found, not some radical institution, was that the median retirement savings for an average working person right now, and this is across all spectrums, right? Those who have a defined benefit plan, those who have a 401k plan, the half of the population that has no retirement plan at all. Across the whole spectrum, the median retirement savings for an average worker was $3,000. $3,000. And for someone close to retirement, it was $12,000. That is obscenely short of what someone would need in retirement in order to live with some dignity. So with the folks in this room, as stewards of workers' capital, you represent a lot of money. And I was thinking about this today on the way over here. I think a better title for this presentation would be Know What You Own. Because what I want to talk to you about today is, in speaking about the report we put together, you should know that many of the managers, dozens of the managers who come to you and seek your retirement assets, your members' deferred wages, workers' capital, many of those managers also either contribute to or sit on the boards of groups who are out to destroy defined benefit plans. So if the mantra is know what you own, you should know, you should have the transparency and disclosure that when a manager sits down across the table from you and seeks an investment, that person's also serving on the board of a place like the Manhattan Institute, which has made it one of their signature goals to destroy defined benefit plans. So I'll get into this more in a second, but the Manhattan Institute, many of you are aware of ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is the Koch brother-funded right-wing group that allows corporations to buy legislation that they think is in their interest. And Robert laid it out really well. Do we think a 401k model is better? Well, the ALEC folks do, because many of their funders believe that they can generate more fees on someone in a defined contribution system than a defined benefit system. And it makes sense. In a defined benefit system, you and your participants can collectively bargain down fees and bargain for better investment terms. In a defined contribution system, you're on your own. But what the Manhattan Institute has done is become ALEC's go-to group for how to privatize retirement security. ALEC had a conference last fall where they put the Manhattan Institute up on a panel and said, Manhattan Institute, tell all these legislators how in just the few places, thank God it's a few, where workers have been forced privatized from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan, tell this group of legislators, Manhattan Institute, how that's done. And again, Robert laid it out extremely well. What they do now is not go directly at you, right? Many of my brothers and sisters from the firefighters in this room, we lived through and won the retirement fight in California 10 years ago, where Arnold Schwarzenegger came right at the plan, and he failed miserably. What they do now is say to the legislators, if the actuary on the plan isn't telling you what you want to hear in terms of the return rate, if he or she isn't lowering it, then fire that actuary, go hire an outside actuary. So I've digressed for a second here, but that's why Manhattan Institute is at the top of our list. You all are doing honorable work, and your retirement model should be the keystone. It should be what we build from. And if we look at replacing the three-legged stool, and that's where I want to end with it, and commending again the work of NCPERS in now concretely finding a way to expand retirement, especially in the private sector, both through the Secure Choice Plan and some more promising work being done around a coalition with state treasurers and asset managers. But I'll get there in a second. So what I asked, the one thing I asked for you all today is to go back to your retirement systems and share a copy of our AFT report with your plan consultant, with your other trustees, with your fund-of-fund manager. The fund-of-fund manager, in many cases, if you're in hedge funds, is investing in the firms I'll name in a second, and you don't know it. My good friend Bill Atwood from the Illinois State Board of Investment was really a leader in going back to his fund and saying, you know, I don't see any direct investment in any of these managers who are attacking retirement systems, but let me check with Entrust, our fund-of-funds manager, and see if we have exposure to them that way. And Bill found out that he did have exposure through Entrust, the third point. So I would also ask you to share this with your fund-of-fund manager. And just to stop here for a second, there are really 4 groups that we're targeting and think are seeking, you know, it's pretty ingenious strategy, right? They're asking for your members to pay for their own destruction. If retirement managers who want to manage your defined benefit plans are supporting these groups who are out to destroy defined benefit plans, put aside the insanity of that rationale from a business standpoint. Right? Many hedge funds and private equity firms wouldn't have money to invest but for defined benefit plans. So I have no idea why they would want to support these 4 groups who are out to destroy plans. I have some theories which we could talk about, but let me just talk about these 4 groups really quickly, and then we can get into managers and the retirement security report, and then some of the success that we've had. First, given that we're here in Illinois, Illinois is Broke is a group that is openly attacking defined benefit plans here in this state. They led the assault on the state system earlier this year, and they're now front and center in Chicago. The Manhattan Institute I mentioned, again, partnering with ALEC, and you know, from a Manhattan Institute report, they said the following. They said the public sector should take a page from the private sector and convert all workers to defined contribution system. Now, again, as Robert mentioned, hasn't that been a wild success in the private sector, workers in 401ks? No, it's been an absolute disaster. But the Manhattan Institute hasn't backed off one bit that position, their advocacy for it, or most importantly, their attempts to seek your members' money through retirement managers to make the case for that. Students First. Now, normally Students First, led by a woman named Michelle Rhee, is known for their advocacy around public education, attacking teachers' unions, advocating for vouchers and charter schools. But I guess Students First decided that wasn't enough for them, so they've also put together a state report card where they evaluate states on a number of factors. One of the most important factors they evaluated states on was whether the state had a defined benefit plan or a defined contribution plan. So in this report card, that factor was important enough to Students First that they weighed it 3 times as much. They said if in Alaska, a state has a defined contribution plan only for their retirees, they get an A. In Illinois or Florida, if a state has a defined benefit plan for their employees and not a defined contribution plan, they get an F. So for us, that became pretty clear that Students First wants to see all of your plans privatized, and they think it's better that a teacher or a public employee is on their own. And then lastly, the Show Me Institute, which in many ways is my favorite because it's led by a guy named Rex Singfield, who has designs on becoming sort of a Midwestern Koch brother, in that he's funding a lot of the attacks, not just on retirement plans, but on public employee collective bargaining, on every kind of right in the public sector that allows your members, our participants, to have access to the middle class. So those are the 4 targets. Let me talk now about the managers who are either contributing to those groups or, in our view, more of an affront sitting on their boards. Just before I go to that, so you all have it, there is the address, the web domain for where you can get a copy of the AFT Asset Manager Report. And we can also send around a copy afterward, but it's go.aft.org/assetmgrs. And my contact info will be up here at the end. And if you need a copy or want to discuss this or any of the managers in more detail, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. So here are the 4 firms that we think are the most important engagement priorities. The next slide will talk about the firms who have taken positive action to remove themselves from our list. But these are the 4 firms who are really dug in and are saying, we don't really care if you as pension plans, you as participants, you as unions, we don't really care if you're offended by the fact that we want to destroy your defined benefit plans. And I guess the one other thing I'll say here before going into detail about these groups is you all as trustees are hit over the head all the time with fiduciary duty, right? The duty of loyalty, the duty of prudence. Well, is it loyal or prudent to your participants to award allocations to managers out to destroy defined benefit plans? I think it's actually in your participants' interest to hold these retirement plans, to hold these managers to account. And I think one of the most important things I would ask you to do when you get a copy of the asset manager report is go to the back. And again, with Chicago as a leadership model, I don't know if Jay Rehack is here in the audience, the Chicago teachers retirement system has a new policy that asks for what I think is the most robust disclosure for asset managers. So we're not, we have the AFT asset manager report. We have you all asking questions, including Hank in his role as a trustee. But if we have ongoing robust disclosure baked into your plan's documents, that's an easier way to get at these questions. So that's, everyone asked me at the end of these presentations, so what do we do about this? I think the Chicago policy, using that as a model, which other states have done. In Pennsylvania, they've done that. In Florida, they've done that. Dan Givens is a leader on this issue. I would really commend you to go look at that disclosure. So the four most important targets in our mind are first GTCR. GTCR is the private equity firm formerly owned by or started by Bruce Rauner, the gubernatorial candidate here in Illinois. And again, there's a certain irony here and a certain hypocrisy, if you ask me, in that Bruce Rauner, in his earlier industry days, made tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars off of our participants. His firm made money investing for defined benefit plans, but he made a pretty penny himself in that arena. Bruce Rauner is now on the campaign trail saying that public employees should be on their own. They should have a defined contribution system. So, it's too expensive for everyone except for Bruce and for the employees he used to invest for years ago. So, he's not with the firm anymore, but he does have an equity stake with them. He does have an ownership stake with them. And they should take a position on what someone whose name, R for Rauner, is saying about defined benefit plans right now. We pulled their client list. GTCR they don't have dozens, they have hundreds of public employee plans who are participants, who are limited partners in their firm. That's first. Second, and in the introduction we mentioned the update, we just recently added GTCR and a second firm, and this is Highbridge Capital. Highbridge is a hedge fund run by a guy named Glenn Dubin. And Glenn has taken it upon himself to use his money, which is derived from the firm, which is derived from his ownership interest in the firm, to donate a lot of money, 6 figures, to Students First, New York, and their political action committee. The last two I'll mention are Third Point Capital. Third Point, in my view, is a double offender. Their founder, Dan Loeb, is both on the board of the Manhattan Institute, and then that didn't take up enough of his time, so he's also on the board of Students First New York, and has been completely unapologetic about the fact that he both wants to invest worker capital, but also serve on the board of groups out to destroy workers' capital. And, when we started sharing this report with asset managers, it started changing behavior. But it only changed behavior because you as trustees were giving it to your asset manager, were giving it to your consultant. And what's happened with firms like Third Point is, I think it's caused a lot of managers, it's caused a lot of clients of Third Point to go back and look at their volatility, their returns, which really haven't been that good, and say, is it really worth our time to be invested with someone out to destroy defined benefit plans, especially if their performance hasn't been very good? So what we saw in a place like Rhode Island, where we have someone serving as a sole trustee and a fiduciary who's no friend of the working man or woman, Gina Raimondo, Rhode Island fired Dan Loeb. They fired him because of his volatility to their portfolio, but they fired him nonetheless. And I think, giving a 30-second legal primer to you as trustees, under ERISA, which many of your public laws match, you have a right to look at 2 managers of similar performance and take into account that one is supportive or neutral on defined benefit plans and the other is out to destroy them. you look at performance first, but if you have two managers of like performance, you can take into account the bad actions of one and the good or neutral actions of others. So that's third point. Last is Elliott. Elliott is led by a guy named Paul Singer. Paul Singer is chair of the Manhattan Institute and has also been involved in things like trying to help the Koch brothers buy the Tribune newspapers, which, again, being here in Chicago, Sam Zell drove into bankruptcy. So those are our four top targets. Those are the four I would ask you all, if you're invested in, either directly or through a hedge fund of funds, to go talk to, ask questions. Why are these firms donating to or serving on the boards of groups out to destroy your members' plans? And I think what that kind of action does is create positive change. And I'm going to spend a few minutes now on the places where we have seen positive change and really hold up asset managers who've taken action and responded to our concerns. The first is dimensional fund advisors. Dimensional fund advisors, I mentioned Rex Sinkfield earlier. Rex Sinkfield started the Show Me Institute. He was also one of the people who started this firm, Dimensional Fund Advisors, in Texas, a large asset manager. What Dimensional Fund Advisors did was get a little bit out in front of themselves, in that they manage $50 billion of defined benefit plans and $15 billion of defined contribution plans. But the marketing for the defined contribution plans was cannibalizing their defined benefit base. And by that I mean DFA hired Bill Bradley, who, you know, I'm a progressive. I got my start in politics admiring and following people like Bill Bradley. Bill Bradley went into Kansas last year and testified in front of the legislature that they should convert their plan from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. Bill Bradley was hired and paid for by DFA. So we brought that to DFA's attention. We named them in the first version of the report we put out last spring, and we also pointed out to DFA, listen, Rick Sinkfield is your firm's co-founder. He's also the supporter and creator of the Show Me Institute. What gives here? And to their credit, DFA took quick action. They fired Rex Sinkfield from their board. They said, Rex, if you want to be a right-wing nut job, go do that in your own free time. So he's no longer associated with DFA. And they also said on an ongoing basis, and this is really, again, a model for what we were able to achieve during the Social Security fight. I know Sandy March is here. She was a leader around that fight in engaging asset managers. What DFA said on a going forward basis is we will no longer advocate for defined contribution plans over defined benefit plans. So that had them removed from our list. Court Square had a senior executive on the board of the Manhattan Institute, Thomas McWilliams. He resigned. AQR, in the same way, Cliff Asness, on the Manhattan Institute board, resigning. Aon Hewitt is the most recent example. In the report we released about a month ago, found that Aon Hewitt, the consultant that many of you use for your plans, was a significant funder of the group that created Illinois' Broke, the commercial club of the Civic Committee of Chicago. Aon Hewitt, to their credit, responded extremely quickly. They responded because you all as clients were going to them and saying, why are you on this report? But what Aon Hewitt did was resign, was cut ties to the commercial club of the Civic Committee of Chicago, and pledge a renewed commitment to working with groups like NCPERS and the National Institute of Retirement Security to really get the word out about the good facets of defined benefit plans, of the fact that they're an economic bargain, not to mention an economic engine. So that's Aon Hewitt. The last two, Donald Smith and Company and KKR, were kind of lower on the offensive scale. They had both contributed to groups like the Manhattan Institute out to attack DB plans and pledged to no longer do that and work with us. And that's really where I want to end, because I think KKR, of all places, has been a leader in this. But let me just show you a couple headlines that came about as a result of this work. You can see at the bottom left, this report really got off to a good start when Matt Taibbi from Rolling Stone wrote about Dan Loeb, and in particular his hypocrisy around defined benefit plans, and that while he was serving on the board of the Manhattan Institute and Students First New York, which he continues to do, last spring he was coming to one of our affiliated organizations, CII, the Council of Institutional Investors, to really make a pitch for why he as an asset manager should get more of your members' money. And when we, meaning AFT and our sister and brother public employee unions, challenged him and said, Dan, we want to ask you some questions about why you're engaged in destroying plans that you want to invest for. This guy who's really kind of, excuse my language, kind of a badass, or thinks he's a badass, he suddenly got a little worried, and to use Taibbi's term, he turtled. He didn't show up at the CII event, and wrote us a scathing letter from afar, and we haven't been able to get a meeting with him since then. And I think it's going to take continued engagement from funds like Rhode Island, which this is one case where I'll hold up Rhode Island as a model. There are others where, if these guys start getting tough questions and they know that their business is at risk, they're going to change behavior. But Dan Loeb's one example. You can see the others, including, Institutional Investor, which was ranking the different groups, ranking the different groups in terms of who's advocating on behalf of our members, and named Randy Weingarten, our president there. So there's my contact info. I still have a little bit of time left, so I just wanted to close by talking about, and again, commending NCPERS and Hank for their effort here. The most promising thing that I see going on right now to break us out of this bind that we're in is the Secure Choice Plan and the work that we're doing with a group of asset managers and state treasurers and other unions. And the work there is designed to support state efforts to expand access to private sector retirement security. And the reason I think that's important is, we get pitted all too often, and Robert mentioned this, we get pitted all too often against the person whose 401k has been decimated, or the person who doesn't have any retirement plan at all. And the demonizers point to our members and say, look at this person who's got a secure benefit. Don't forget about the fact that that person's average benefit's probably, what is it in Detroit, $22,000 a year? Forget about that. Forget about the fact that they earned that and contributed to that over a lifetime. Forget about the fact that it's an economic engine. It's easy to demonize and say to someone who's scared and on their own, look at what that person has. They shouldn't have that. You're paying too much as a taxpayer for that. We want to break out of that debate and not have that kind of dynamic go on, but rather say to that person, you should have what our member has. And I think what this new effort, this new coalition, sort of a strange bedfellow coalition, including the likes of KKR and AQR, and a bipartisan group of state treasurers, what this group is trying to do is set up a coalition and a new retirement center to promote the ideas that Hank has shown a lot of leadership around, the Secure Choice Plan. And the unifying thread that knits all these groups together is the belief in the fact that individuals should have access to pooled professional asset management in the private sector, either managed by the state or some other body. And that we get out of this really destructive dynamic where we're attacking what remains of retirement security in the public sector, but rather looking for a way to level up. So with that, you have my contact information up there. Please feel free to call me or email me if you have questions or want to follow up. I don't know, Hank, if we have a few minutes for questions or if we want to roll into, okay.
Questions or comments? Back there?
I just wonder about this thesis about, you're talking about these managers wanting to convert everyone to defined contribution because they can get a lot of fees. But as we've all heard before, the balance on these 401k accounts with these defined contribution funds are so low. I don't see how they're actually going to profit from this effort. So, can you tell me other things that may be driving them to this effort?
Dan, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, for the folks who couldn't hear, the question was, is it really the profit motive that is driving some of these asset managers to want to privatize defined benefit plans, or is it something else? I think the profit motive is the main motivator. And I use DFA as an example. They manage $50 billion worth of defined benefit plans and 15 of defined contribution plans. The fee model for the defined contribution plans for them is much higher than the defined benefit model. And yes, the median savings for employees is $4,000 and $12,000, but that's the median. There's a lot of folks, above that and even more scarily below that. So I think the profit motive is first in that, if you look across all asset classes, individuals pay a heck of a lot more than defined benefit plans who can collectively bargain fees down. I think that's first, but I think your question's a good one in that there are other motivators there. I think, there's ideology too, right? In that, and it's ideology that's so extreme that it's ideology that undermines that person's own business interests. And by that, I mean, I'll use my good friend Dan Loeb as an example again. He said, I love teacher pensions, I just hate teachers' unions, which really means he just hates teachers. He loves their money. And I think what we're trying to do is force these asset managers to decide between greed or their profit motive and ideology. And what some have done is choose, good business relationships over ideology, but a few have stuck with ideology and are pretty dug in. Other questions?
Thank you for that comment. I think that's something that the executive board and officers will clearly look at. In the meantime, we have been working very closely with Dan and the American Federation of Teachers. The report that Dan based his presentation on is available on our website currently, but I think further collaboration is certainly warranted.
And I would just reinforce that by saying Hank, again, as a trustee himself, has put this into action and been an incredible ally. So thank you for that. Other questions? Yes, sir.
These seem like fairly boutique firms you're looking at. Where are the major players? The Fidelity, Vanguard.
So the question was, these seem like boutique firms. In their asset class, they're not boutique firms. I mean, Third Point manages, I think $14 billion in their main fund. KKR is the largest private equity firm in the world. But the largest asset managers, I think, have largely stayed away from this, except in cases like, and again, I know my friend Dan Givens is here from Florida. We spoke at a conference last year. Some of the largest asset managers still show up in states like Florida, and this isn't Fidelity, but I think it was Bank of America, if Dan's out here, who, Bank of America or some of the other large asset managers in Florida are part of the State Chamber of Commerce. And the State Chamber of Commerce in Florida was leading the attack on the Florida public employee retirement system. So I think, part of my hope here is that folks take this back to their homes and their funds and self-organize and really start connecting the dots where they aren't being connected yet. And I think we would welcome, in partnership with NCPERS and our other brother and sister unions, we would welcome adding to those group of 4 that I started with other asset managers who are involved here. We haven't seen any direct links yet, but I think there's still some further research and organizing that can go on in the States.
That's good.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, everyone.